My name is Myrtle Jean Holloway. I'm 84 years old. Some people call me Ms. Myrtle. Others just say Grandma. But the name I hear the most lately? Burton. I wasn't always like this, quiet, small, bent. There was a time I danced barefoot in spring grass and ran a quilting business from my back porch in Dover, Delaware. I raised 3 boys on my own after my husband died too early and too suddenly. I taught Sunday school for 37 years. I was never the type to sit still or ask for help. But time has a cruel way of folding you in. Last year, when my knees gave out and my cataracts blurred the world into fog, my youngest boy, Winston, said, "Mama, it's best you move in with us. You'll be safe." Safe. That word clung to my heart like honey on broken glass. They moved me into their guest room. No windows. No lamp. Just a stiff bed and the sound of their whispers through thin walls. I told myself it was temporary. Just till I got stronger. But days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Winston was always too busy to talk. And his wife, Tessa, well, she never liked me much. I figured she'd come around once we shared space. I was wrong. It started small. She stopped greeting me. She forgot to wash my clothes. She'd roll her eyes when I asked for help to the bathroom. Slam the door harder than needed. Toss plates on the table like I was a dog. But the worst thing she did was what she fed me. One rainy Thursday, I sat at the table while she stirred something in the pot. I couldn't see well, but I could smell, and that night, something smelled off. She placed the bowl in front of me and said with a snicker, "It's stew. Eat up." But I heard the dog barking in the garage. I heard her earlier giggling on the phone to her friend. She thinks she's eating beef tips, but it's really Rufus's leftovers from the floor, she'd said. I pretended to be blind, to not hear, to not feel the weight of what was happening. But that night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep either. I cried quietly into the pillow that still smelled like my old house. I wondered how I got here, reduced to this. They thought I didn't know. They thought my cloudy eyes meant my ears were gone too. They thought their whispers and laughs wouldn't reach my soul. But I heard everything. And that's when something inside me cracked. Not my bones. Not my sight. My silence. I knew right then. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to prove my worth to people who forgot who I was. I was going to take my time. I was going to take it all back. And I was going to start with their electricity bill. Because what they didn't know was the house they lived in was in my name. Asterisk, asterisk. Bellhop Bell, don't scroll past this story. Speech balloon comment below if you've ever been underestimated or mistreated because of your age. Like this video if you believe no elder deserves to be disrespected. Subscribe to Buried Truth for more emotional stories that reveal what lies beneath. Share this story and remind the world, never mistake quiet for powerless. The morning after I made my silent vow, the house felt colder. Not in temperature, but in spirit. Tessa didn't speak a word to me as she passed the dining room. She scrolled through her phone, smirking at something, then tossed a bag of stale bread on the table. "For your breakfast," she said without looking up. "It's what we had." I nodded. That was all I ever did. Nod, smile faintly, keep my thoughts inside. She didn't know that my hearing was sharp as ever. I had heard her arguing with Winston the night before. "She's costing us too much," she hissed. "Electric, groceries, the medical stuff. What are we getting out of this?" "A thank you?" Winston mumbled something weak, something about family and patience. But even he wasn't defending me like he used to. He used to hold my hand on walks. Used to leave work early to check in. Now, he barely made eye contact unless he needed something from me. A signature. A bank detail. A favor. That was the key. Because although they treated me like an afterthought, my name was still on things they assumed they owned. The car outside. The house. Even the line of credit they were using to renovate the kitchen. I had quietly built a life with no fanfare. A teacher's pension. A small inheritance from my brother. And my name, my clean, simple name, was the one thing they needed to keep their lifestyle afloat. I knew it. But more importantly, they didn't know I knew. I waited that week. Observed. Listened. They scheduled a vacation for themselves. A beach resort, according to Tessa's loud call with her cousin. I sat in the corner as she bragged. Booked the penthouse. He thinks I'm paying. But wait till the card gets swiped. Myrtle's name is on it, not mine. Laughter followed. My hands shook under the table, but I kept my face still. That night, I called an old friend. Her name was Edna May. We had taught at the same school decades ago. She was the one person who had stood by me during my hardest years. When I called her, she answered on the first ring. Myrtle, she said. Is that really you? I took a deep breath. Edna, I think I need to borrow your guest room. Just for a while. There was no hesitation. Pack your things. I'll be there in the morning. I hung up and looked around the room. I didn't have much. They'd already thrown away most of my things from my old house, claiming it was clutter. I had my Bible, my old locket, a few sweaters. But most importantly, I had copies of every deed, document, and account they were tapping into. I spent the night slowly collecting them, quietly placing each paper into my canvas bag. At dawn, I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. When Tessa came in to wake me, I was already dressed. Going somewhere? She asked, surprised. I nodded. Just out. Won't be long. And then I walked right out the front door. Edna was parked across the street in her powder blue Buick. She stepped out, helped me in, and handed me a fresh thermos of tea. You ready to stop playing small? She asked. I looked at the window of the house one last time. The curtains fluttered slightly, as if someone had been watching. I didn't answer her. I just smiled. And as we drove off, I whispered to myself, let the games begin. Because now, I wasn't just leaving the house. I was taking everything they built on my back with me. And they had no idea the foundation was already cracking. Edna's home was warm in a way no thermostat could replicate. It smelled of lavender soap and cinnamon tea. The guest room was small, but it had a window that let in sunlight. That alone felt like a luxury after months in that dark box they called a room. I took a hot bath, laid my documents out on the bed, and for the first time in a long time, began to feel human again. Edna didn't ask too many questions. She knew better than to poke at a fresh bruise. Instead, she let me be, gave me space, fed me properly. She even took me to the library 2 towns over, where I could read quietly and use the computer. It was there, in that quiet corner between the archives and the mystery novels, that I began the real work. I printed my property documents, froze the credit cards with my name attached, and called the bank to revoke access. They asked me security questions. Every answer I knew by heart. I didn't tell them what was going on. I didn't need to. All I said was, I'd like to protect my assets. Within 24 hours, their financial world began to unravel. Tessa called first. She didn't bother with hello. What the hell did you do? She hissed. I held the phone a few inches away from my ear. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea. I'm sorry, dear. Can you speak clearly? The cards aren't working. The utilities are frozen. Winston said the house loan has been flagged. What's going on? I paused. Must be a mistake. But I suggest you start paying your own bills. I won't be covering them anymore. You can't do this to us. You did it to yourselves. I ended the call. She called back twice. I didn't answer. That evening, Winston called. His voice was softer. Almost panicked. Mama, please. Let's talk about this. We're under a lot of stress. Stress, I said, evenly, is when you're 84 and being fed dog food by people who once sat at your table as children. He was quiet. I didn't know, he finally said. You did, I replied. You just didn't look. And I hung up. I spent the rest of that week quietly alerting the other entities connected to my accounts. My insurance agent, my lawyer, the energy company. Bit by bit, I cut off the lifelines they thought they were entitled to. Edna watched it all with silent approval. She said, You're not just protecting yourself. You're reminding them who you are. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about respect. About finally standing up for the version of me that had endured too much for too long. Late one night, I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since I moved in with Winston and Tessa. I flipped through the pages. Prayers. grocery lists, clippings, and a note I wrote to myself months ago. It read, "Don't disappear. Not like this." I smiled and underlined it, because I wasn't disappearing. I was finally being seen. And the storm that was coming? They wouldn't be ready. By the end of the week, the calls stopped. First the angry ones, then the pleading ones. Silence settled in like fog. I knew what that meant. They were scrambling. Without my signature, their renovation loan was frozen. The kitchen cabinets they ordered sat unpaid. The mortgage company reached out, asking for proof of income. And the utilities? They'd have to start paying from their own pockets now. But I wasn't done. There was still one more step I needed to take, one that would ensure they couldn't worm their way back in. I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Lorraine Hatcher. I'd met her years ago through a church friend, and I kept her card all this time, just in case. Lorraine didn't ask questions when I told her I wanted to transfer the deed of the house, not to Winston, not to anyone in the family, but to a trust in my name, controlled only by me. "You sure about this, Ms. Myrtle?" she asked. "I've never been more sure." It took 3 days. When it was done, I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Ownership. Not just over a house, but over my life. Edna took me out to celebrate. We sat at a little diner on the edge of town, and for the first time in months, I ordered whatever I wanted without worrying what anyone thought. A thick burger. Fries. A strawberry milkshake. I looked out the window as the sun began to set. It painted the sky orange and purple, like a promise. And that's when I saw them. Winston's car, parked across the street. They had followed me. He stepped out first. Then Tessa. Her hair was pulled back, face pale. They walked into the diner like they were stepping into a courtroom. "Mama," Winston began. "We just want to talk." Edna didn't move. She folded her napkin and placed it on her plate. "You have 5 minutes," I said. Tessa sat down, arms crossed. "This isn't fair," she started. "You just left. You humiliated us." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You did that to yourselves the day you decided I was no longer worth decency." "We made sacrifices too," she hissed. I looked her dead in the eye. "And yet, I'm the one who paid for them." Winston tried to intervene. "I didn't know she was feeding you that." "You knew," I interrupted. "You just looked away." He fell silent. I leaned forward. "You took my kindness for weakness. You used my money, my name, and my love, and you turned it into control. But I'm not your insurance policy. I'm not your backup plan. I'm your mother." Tessa stood, furious. "You think this makes you strong? You're just a bitter old woman who'll die alone." Edna chuckled. "She's not alone. But you? You might want to look around when the credit runs out." They left. No more yelling. No more threats. Just silence. And as I sipped my milkshake, I smiled for the first time in a long time. Because the woman they left behind in that dark room? She was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone they never expected. Someone they should have never underestimated. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds instead of yelling. The simple sound of peace. It almost felt unreal. I sat on the porch of Edna's home, wrapped in her wool shawl, sipping from a chipped mug that said "World's Best Librarian." She'd found it at a yard sale and always said it suited me more than it suited her. I thought about everything that had happened, not just over the past few days, but the past decade. The sacrifices, the tolerance, the slow erasure of my identity under the guise of family duty. They chipped away at me with polite dismissals. "No need for you to cook anymore, Grandma. You don't need your own phone. Just use ours. We already changed the account names. Easier that way." It was never abrupt, never violent, but it was complete. They took everything until I was just a shadow in my own story. But no more. Later that day, Edna handed me a folder. Inside were flyers and brochures. Women's organizations, advocacy centers, elder empowerment networks. One of them, called Voices Reclaimed, ran a monthly writing workshop for seniors who had experienced emotional or financial abuse. "Thought you might want to tell your story," she said gently. I stared at the paper for a long moment. Then I nodded. At the first meeting, I sat in a circle with 7 other women. Some in wheelchairs. Some barely able to speak above a whisper. But their stories? They were powerful. One had her home signed away by her niece. Another had been isolated in a care facility for 2 years without a single visitor. And when it was my turn, I told them everything. The lies. The manipulation. The day I was served dog leftovers. The way they laughed when they thought I was blind. And then I told them how I walked away. How I froze the accounts. Took back the house. Reclaimed my name. The room was silent. Then one woman whispered, "You're brave." But I shook my head. I was just tired of being erased. After the meeting, the program director approached me. Her name was Naomi. She looked no older than 30, but her eyes carried wisdom. "We're planning a campaign," she said. "Stories like yours could change lives. Would you be willing to let us publish yours?" I hesitated. Then I remembered that journal entry from weeks ago. "Don't disappear." I smiled and said, "Yes." And that's how it began. An article. Then a podcast appearance. A speech at a town hall. The story of an old woman they thought was weak, echoing across the state. Tessa and Winston couldn't hide from it. People began to recognize them. At work. In stores. At church. Their shame wasn't because I outed them. Their shame was that I survived and spoke. And that I was just getting started. If you've ever been silenced, overlooked, or treated like your life has an expiration date, this is your reminder. You're never too old to speak. Never too old to reclaim your voice. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if Myrtle's story inspired you. There's more to come. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The article was published in a modest magazine under the title, "When They Thought I Couldn't See, I Saw Everything." It didn't go viral. Not at first. But it reached the right people. A woman in Pennsylvania mailed me a handwritten letter thanking me for giving her the courage to move out of her abusive nephew's home. A man from Idaho emailed the center, saying he'd printed out my story and pinned it to the community board in their senior hall. It was never about going viral. It was about being heard. Naomi called one day with a tremble of excitement in her voice. "Myrtle, a local news station wants to do a segment on elder abuse survivors, and they asked for you." "Me? On TV?" I chuckled. "I've only ever been in front of a church crowd." "That's why you'll be perfect." The day came. Edna lent me her best navy coat. I wore my church pearls, brushed out my hair, and walked onto the set like I belonged there, because I did. I didn't cry during the interview, but the anchor did. I told them everything. The slow theft of my freedom, the quiet meals alone, the humiliations disguised as jokes, and the day I stopped paying for my own mistreatment. "I'm not bitter," I said clearly, "but I won't be invisible either." After the interview aired, the calls started again. Not from Winston or Tessa. From other women. Men. People who had waited their whole lives to feel seen. One woman told me, "You gave me permission to leave." Another simply said, "Thank you for reminding me that I matter." I never planned on becoming a symbol. I never thought my pain would spark something so wide. But sometimes healing isn't just private. Sometimes it's loud. Public. Necessary. And it forces others to look at what they'd rather ignore. Meanwhile, Winston and Tessa were drowning in their own mess. The IRS was on their backs for inconsistencies in the house filing. Turns out, when you misuse someone else's pension for personal gain and don't declare it, the government notices. Their reputations in town shifted. Not overnight. But word spreads. People don't forget a story like mine. Especially not when it reflects their own. And in the midst of all that noise, legal papers, letters, cold stares, my son made one last attempt. He wrote me a letter. It wasn't an apology. It was a justification. He said they did what they had to do. That life was hard. That no one taught them how to handle an aging parent. That Tessa was stressed. That I made them feel watched. As if being treated like a burden was supposed to make me invisible. I burned the letter. I didn't need his reasons. Because I already had my answer. I was never the problem. They were just too small to carry the weight of decency. And now, for the first time in years, I was free of trying to fix what was never mine to carry. Let them live with their shame. I was living with my truth. Winter arrived quietly. Snow settled across the neighborhood like a soft hush, blanketing roofs and empty yards. From the window of my small but cozy cottage, yes, mine, under my name alone, I watched the flakes fall as the fire crackled beside me. This was peace. Real peace. No one yelling in the next room. No one tracking every dollar I spent. No one sighing when I asked for a warm meal. Just me, Edna's laughter in the kitchen, and a plate of homemade pot roast she insisted I didn't have to cook. She was family now. Chosen family. One evening, I stood at the window holding my tea when a car slowed near the driveway. I knew that car. Winston. He didn't get out. He sat there for a few minutes, engine running, hands clenched around the wheel, then drove away. I didn't move. He wasn't here for me. He was here for himself. Maybe he wanted forgiveness. Maybe he wanted pity. Or maybe he was just trying to see if I had really moved on. And I had. Because you see, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means reclaiming your power. A few days later, Naomi called again. This time with something different in her voice. There's a group of women in 3 states using your story in workshops. They call it the Myrtle Stand. I nearly dropped the phone. They what? They're using your story as a case study in reclaiming voice. Your name is becoming a symbol. I didn't speak for a moment. My heart thudded quietly in my chest. Myrtle Stand, I whispered. For the first time, my pain had turned into someone else's roadmap. I hadn't just survived. I had made something of it. Edna framed a copy of the article and hung it in my living room, right above the small bookshelf where I kept my journals. And on the wall, in bold black letters, I painted something. Don't disappear. The same words I'd written to myself the night I left. Now it was a promise. To never shrink again. To never go blind to my own needs again. To never pay for anyone else's cruelty with my silence. To be seen. To be heard. To be Myrtle. If Myrtle's story moved you, don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice to break the silence for thousands. And if you're listening from a quiet room of your own, wondering if anyone sees you, we do. You matter. You always have. The State Auditorium was packed that afternoon. Rows of seniors, social workers, students, and quiet faces, some tearful, some hopeful, filled every seat. I adjusted my scarf and walked slowly toward the podium. The same woman who once sat in silence with dog scraps on her plate was now the keynote speaker for the Elder Justice Summit. Edna stood in the front row, beaming like a proud sister. Naomi nodded from the sidelines, clipboard in hand, eyes full of trust. I looked out at the crowd and took a breath. My name is Myrtle Grace Whitmore. I'm 76 years old. And this is the first time in my life I've ever spoken into a microphone. Laughter. But I wasn't trying to be funny. For years, I was told I was too much, too slow, too in the way. I was told I didn't matter, that I should sit down and fade away. And for a long time, I did. I paused. But then one day, they fed me dog scraps and laughed while I pretended not to notice. And I realized if I didn't save myself, no one else would. There was a stillness in the room, the kind that tells you people are really listening. I told them my truth. All of it. The manipulation. The slow gaslighting. The moment my own son turned cold. The moment my daughter-in-law mocked me to my face. The day I walked away and never looked back. But here's what I want you to hear most, I said firmly. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. But silence isn't weakness. Silence is fuel. And one day, it burns hot enough to rebuild your whole life. Applause. Not thunderous, but heavy, meaningful. After the speech, strangers came up to me with stories like mine. Some had bruises that weren't visible. Others had homes that no longer felt like home. But now they had a path. One woman, eyes red from tears, grabbed my hand and whispered, I thought I was the only one. I squeezed her hand. You're not. You never were. Weeks later, I signed a contract. Not with a lawyer. Not with a retirement agency. With a publisher. They wanted my memoir. And I gave it to them. Every raw detail. Every tear. Every betrayal. It hit shelves 3 months later under the title, When They Thought I Was Blind. At the launch event, I sat behind a long table, signing copies for people who never knew they needed the book until they opened the first page. And I finally understood something. I wasn't just telling my story to heal myself. I was telling it so others could finally breathe again. Winston and Tessa? They heard about it. Of course they did. The town is small. The internet smaller. They sent no apology. Just silence. And that was fine with me. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies. Not for understanding. And certainly not for permission. I had already given myself everything I ever needed. Freedom. Voice. And peace. If Myrtle's journey spoke to your heart, let it remind you, it is never too late to stand up. To start over. To speak. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And if you know someone suffering in silence, share this. Their voice might be waiting for your courage. 6 months passed. The book had done more than sell. It sparked a movement. Across the country, churches, senior centers, and book clubs hosted When They Thought I Was Blind reading circles. Counselors wrote articles. Activists quoted my words. But the part that stung me the most? The letters. Hundreds of them. Handwritten, typed, emailed, sent with flowers, tucked between pages of returned books. From daughters. From grandsons. From silent mothers in quiet houses, all saying the same thing. You help me remember who I am. That's all I ever wanted. To remind people that their worth is not dependent on how they are treated, but how they rise. The mayor of my small Delaware town invited me to speak at the annual Civic Leadership Breakfast. I declined. Not because I was afraid, but because I had other plans that morning. A ribbon cutting. At the Myrtle Grace Community Resource House. A restored blue Victorian cottage, donated by a local developer who read my story and cried beside his mother. Inside, it was filled with warm chairs, good coffee, free legal advice, and a private line for seniors escaping abusive situations. There were no plaques. No gold signs. Just the name in simple print over the door. Because this wasn't about fame. It was about protection. Healing. And legacy. That day, after the ribbon was cut, Edna handed me a plain brown envelope. It came in the mail for you. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo. Of me. At 15. Smiling. Standing beside a small piano. My mother's handwriting on the back. My smart, brave girl. And for a moment, tears welled up. She had loved me. Somewhere, beneath her silence and compliance, there had been love. Or regret. Or something too complex to name. But I didn't cry out of sadness. I cried because I had finally given that girl in the photo the life she deserved. I forgive you, Mama, I whispered. Not for her. For me. I stood from the bench outside the news center and faced the sky. At 77, I had lived lifetimes inside one lifetime. I had walked through pain no child should bear. And I had emerged with something no one could strip from me again. My voice. My peace. My purpose. Later that evening, Naomi asked me what I wanted to do next. I smiled. I want to rest. Not because I'm tired, but because I've finally earned it. She grinned. And after that, I want to listen to other stories. Help carry them. Remind people they are not alone. And maybe that's what life becomes after the storm passes. You become shelter for someone else. If you followed Myrtle's story to this moment, thank you. Let it be your sign that silence is not survival. Speaking is. Please like this video if her journey moved you. Share it to honor the voices still waiting to rise. And subscribe for more real stories that restore power to the forgotten. Because Myrtle's story isn't just one woman's truth. It's a mirror. And maybe it's yours too.